And that was it. I thought it was all over then.
But it wasn't over. In fact, Geldof's journey was only just beginning.
I said to him, come out. We'll take you out there. I'll take you to where it's all happening. We'll have it all organised. Minimum number of days spent on it, but come and see it for yourself. Fuck off, he said.
What they said is, look, if we're to continue with this story, the editors don't want to know, it's over for them. The only story now is Geldof being in Africa.
I phoned them the next day and said, have you had a chance to rethink where you're going? Oh, fuck off. And the next day, fuck off, I would see something in the diary, in the newspaper, Bob Geldof collecting money from Parlophone Records or whatever it was. Go along, Bob, fuck off. And went on like this.
While Geldof stalled, resentment about the Band-Aid Trust was gathering in unexpected quarters.
One of the surprising sources was the other charities. They saw us as a threat. They were very concerned that money which came to us was not going to go to them. And I said to Bob, it will be essential that you can demonstrate to the press and to the public who've given you all this money that you know the money's been well spent. And the only real way of doing that is to go out with the first cargo load and make sure you go from London right into the camps so that you can see that all the aid is properly distributed.
Geldof was wavering, but there was one sticking point.
Then Bob came on to me in the office and said, I'm thinking about this, but you know there'll be no fucking pictures of me with dead babies. Because that would, that's why I wanted him there. Not dead babies, but I wanted him there to show what was happening. I wanted him, beside a baby who was stick thin and stuff like that. Anyway, and I won't be going unless I get that promise from you. You are a dirty dealing. You're the man that ruins people's lives. You are not going to fucking ruin my life because I've got to make a living after this. I'm not a rich man. I don't have any money. But if I'm seen milking this for me, I am finished.
He's not a missionary. He's not a charity person. It's not his world at all. And he really was very frightened of what he would see. And he didn't want to go.
It's Christmas in Ethiopia, and the arrival of the pop star's flight from London was the focus of considerable curiosity.
A reluctant Geldof agreed to go on a whistle-stop tour of Ethiopia. The 9-day trip would take him to refugee centres and feeding camps in the areas worst hit by the famine. For the rock star, life was about to change, forever.
This scruffy git turned up with a pair of plimsolls, dirty pair of trousers, and I think it was the usual stripy jacket and tatty shirt, looking unwashed, with his bag slung over his shoulder, load of newspapers, and making some comment about a load of fucking journalists.
He was absolutely emphatic that this was not going to be a publicity tour as it could easily have been. That led to, certainly the photographers were very worried about this because why were they there except to do precisely what Bob said he wasn't going to do?
The ultimate thing you can photograph as a photographer is life and death. And suddenly here was this opportunity of going to a country to cover a major story where people were dying. And as a photographer, that is one of the ultimate things you can cover. And I don't care what anybody says, but you get a buzz out of that knowing that you're going to be confronted with seeing death.
You're there watching an indeterminately aged human being. It looked like it was 2 years old, but it probably was 5 or 6 or 7, a huge distended head and eyes, saucer eyes, and flies settling on the mucus of the eyes. And they couldn't stand up, and they were listless in their mother or father's arms, and all they had to give them was a few grains of unhusked wheat, and they'd eat that, and it would be like razors in their stomach, so the child would begin to void its stomach, as well as not just the contents of the stomach. Pick up the baby, Bob.
He didn't stand any nonsense. He said, if you do that, he said, you're out, I won't talk to you. So we had to obey that directive to get cooperation with him. And I do remember filming him at one point when we were in Coram and we were looking at the refugee camp, and he knew the cameras were behind him, and he was just staring in some shock at the scenes that he was seeing, and aware too that we were behind, and he suddenly turned away and expressed for the first time during that whole trip how upset he was. But he never went near to the kids. He didn't pick them up in our presence.
For the man who once said he wanted to get rich, famous and laid, this new life was mind-blowing.
You arrive at somewhere and you look out the window and there's a guard of honor. And you're going, stop this, And they all line up and they're all there, the lads are snapping to attention. So what do you do? I mean, literally, what do you do? What are you supposed to do when there's a guard of honor? So I find myself in this bizarre situation of remembering newsreels of Prince Charles or the Duke of Edinburgh, or somebody looking at a guard of honor. I'll do that. I saw that in a newsreel. So you go along and you're looking at these guys who are looking at you, like these 18-year-old soldiers. They're looking, look at this scruffy cunt. Look at his filthy clothes, Look at the bags on him. He hasn't shaved for a week. And look at his stupid shoes. And I'm here presenting arms to this twat. But I've got to go along, and I wink at a couple of them, and they're kind of going, and next minute there's the minister or the general beside him coming along like this, and I'm going, I don't know how to convey how mad it is. Like, I'm suddenly in this mad world, so unlike anything I've ever experienced. What am I doing here?
Geldof visited the remote village of McCartney in Tigray. The area was swamped by tens of thousands of refugees fleeing the war in the north. On average, 40 people died from starvation every day.
We looked across this vast plain and it was just covered with tent after tent, wigwam-type tents. And we were told there were over 100,000 people that had moved onto this plain that were dying, and they didn't have the food there to feed them. They just didn't have it, and they were just going to die. And it was all kind of in a beige colour. You just couldn't take it in.
And we came upon a little boy and a little girl. The little girl was one of my nightmares. The little girl was about 3 years old, and she was looking after her brother, who was about 1 year old. And the little boy was as close to death as you can be. His eyes were almost fixed, and he had that glassy, waxy look of a child who's about to die. And she continued to wave. She was in a pitiful state herself, but she continued to wave the flies away from around her brother's eyes. And the doctor explained that the little boy was unlikely to make it, but the little girl was in slightly better condition. And we moved up about halfway down the shed. This German nurse came up, spoke to the doctor, and said to the doctor, I don't know if it makes any difference to the photographer's picture of the little boy and little girl, but the little boy has just died. So Bob looked at me, and we moved up the shed. At the top of the shed, this nurse approached us again and said to the doctor, I don't know if it's going to affect your picture, but the little girl has now died. Anyway, Bob continued to talk to the doctor, and I left. And he came, found me. I'd gone behind this truck that was parked up nearby, and I'd been sick, and just... It was an accumulation, but there was something just dreadful about it. And two of us... sorry.
I looked around and Kenny was bawling. And I think that moment of absolute reality just stripped away all that carapace, that hardened shell, and it got him.
So I retreated up the hill a little bit just to, do some general views of the area. And then the doctor emerged from a tent about 6 yards away with Bob, walking up the top end of McKaylee camp, and the kids were just attracted to Bob, and they ran to be alongside him and look at him, the ones who could run. And I thought, shit, that's a picture. I knew Bob would go nuts when I took it.
I just let it happen because I thought that would be real, because suddenly he'd stop being, come on, Bob, you know, we got... And suddenly there was no asking, there was no nothing. It just seemed the most natural thing in the world that this human being would take this picture. And I think that's the one and only picture.
The grueling schedule involved meetings with Ethiopian officials who didn't know what to make of the scruffy pop star.
You'd meet some kind of government official, and that was always, I suppose, not for me to say, but possibly better groomed than Geldof was. And you know, there were one or two occasions when the ministers would come over and sort of their hands outstretched to greet me, and I'm saying, no, it's not me, it's the tramp standing there.
But the dishevelled visitor tried to clean up his sartorial act for a face-to-face meeting with the Ethiopian ruler.
He knocked on my door at the Hilton Hotel that morning and said, Chris, he said, please, have you got another pair of shoes I can borrow? And I said, well, what do you want the shoes for? He said, well, just have a look at the state of mine. And I said, yeah, I know they're pretty awful, but you must have other shoes. And he said, no, he said, the only shoes I've got are carpet slippers. So I said, well, you know, this is obviously what you've got to do, Bob. Put the carpet slippers on. And he said, you bastard. He says, I know why you want me to put carpet slippers on. He said, you're going to film it, aren't you?
Bob Geldof's own feet seemed rather vulnerable. He wore carpet slippers, his shoes having fallen apart.
I didn't want to meet these guys anyway. We could have been out in the field. Reports could have been going back to the UK. I could have been talking to the people working on the ground. I could have been said I had to do this bollocks. I didn't ask for it. And we were all starving, and, you know, and I think food showed up, and I was pacing, and I was getting more and more worried about the meeting. Two, that we were there at all, and some geezer showed up.
Bob just stood there and went, and how dare you keep us fucking waiting while all these people are starving and we're not even seeing the president. We're seeing, you know, the dog's body, as it were, you know.
Okay. So I'd meet the president, I'd get out my amnesty report, because I always had the amnesty report. He is a thug. He murders 60 people a day, he tortures them. So I'd say, says here that you torture people, you know, because it's quite interesting, frankly, meeting a murderer and a torturer. I thought, this guy's a prize cunt, so I just said, you know, I think you're a cunt.
I wonder how the translator put that into Amharic.
The interpreter had stopped interpreting.
You just thought, yes.
I was eating peanuts at the time. I thought, I better eat a lot of these, because when you have a jail here, they don't feed you very regularly. And I thought, God, we're in trouble.
Luckily for Geldof and his party, the insult was apparently lost in translation, and the trip was drawing to a close.
I'd spent the money. I'd lived up to my responsibility by going there, and the crews following me, and that reported back to the Band-Aid generation, if you like. Here you are, here's the people who will benefit from your largesse. Here's how it's been done. This is what's happening now. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
But Geldof was about to embark on the next phase of his strange journey.
In Ethiopia, an acute shortage of transport is still hampering the distribution of food aid, and while the supplies lie in the port, they're at the mercy of the weather.
It wasn't moving, because a cartel operated in the docks of trucks, and they were charging a ridiculous price to shift the food. And I said to someone, well, you know, there should be an alternative fleet of trucks. And they said, there isn't one. How much does that cost? About £3.5 million.
Geldof left Ethiopia, haunted by the images of the past 9 days. He'd bullied the cream of the music world and insulted an African dictator. Now he got the chance to tackle the powers that